Welcome, everyone. It is good to see so many familiar names, whether you are watching this live or clicking on the recording later. My name is Dr. Celina Pierman, and it continues to be our endeavor with the Pierman Group to look at what the research says out there. What are some of the data points? What are some of the studies looking at? And then, like I say, add a sense of humor and then figure out how we try to apply this to our day to day, because there has to be a connection, which has been my journey as a scholar practitioner to look at what is the evidence and then how do we live this. And this would be one of those really good examples. I don't always explain that part, but today's material is really about that. And for some time, I have been a bit fascinated with what I'll call small moves. Now, that's not minimal effort. That is more around what is the difference it's going to take to propel change. Now, I could take it back to growing up and what that looked like in terms of my maybe conversations with my parents when they told me to turn down the music. Anyone else have that experience somewhere along the way? And there is actually a concept in sensory studies of the minimal amount it takes to notice in the senses a difference. That might have led to later on one of my favorite movies of the movie Contact with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. And one of the scenes in there early on in the movie while she is growing up is with her dad as she's listening to the ham radio and trying to make connections over the radio to people around the world. And the quote of his that carries all the way through the movie without a spoiler is small moves, Ellie, small moves. Because as she started listening on much larger telescopes into space, making sense of the chaos, it was small moves. And while we could probably come up with a number of examples, recently and quite frankly over some years, there is a lot of chaos or there's a lot of noise and there's a lot of complexity happening within our companies, our industries, our sectors. And I really wanted to do a deeper dive into what does that mean for us? What are some of those moves we need to make in order to take care of what we can take care of within our scope of influence? There was also a leading voice in the 1900s by a gentleman who is well documented, Buckminster Fuller. And if you're curious on looking him up on the internet, one of Buckminster Fuller's claim to fame is actually what is now on his tombstone. He was a leading architect and visionary, coming up with ideas that would just shake up thinking. And he's someone I've come to appreciate over the years and just pushing that edge of how do we know that's the way it's supposed to be? And on his tombstone is his quote, "Just call me Trim Tab." Now, for those of you who are boaters or aviators, trim tab is a small metal portion that has a lot of control with the steering. And the idea that Buckminster Fuller proposed is that sometimes it's the smallest parts. Sometimes it's the smallest moves or the pushes that finally get us some momentum. And I share that with you going into today because as we have been looking at this research here, I keep wrestling with how do we need to recalibrate when things do feel complicated, when they are complex? What can we do within our scope and space to be able to make the next best moves? So today's content is really around this idea of recalibration. What are those moves? Tuning in, dialing in, sensing and identifying our next best step to be even clearer about alignment, even more and better actions for greater impact. We're going to do a couple of things throughout this. I'm going to introduce you to a little bit more about what our team is working on. We're going to take a look at some of this research and some ideas I have for you today, and we'll send you away with some resources to work on this on your own. On behalf of the Pearman Group, we continue to endeavor to help organizations be successful through and with people learning. So whether that's me on site in person, whether that's live virtual like we're doing now for the folks who've logged in, or through our learning management system with on-demand courses to complement other efforts so that we can get leadership development opportunities to people sooner as they step into those roles and lead teams, whether it's people, projects, other technical expertise. We also want to share with you a few of our quotes, the quotes that are in my book that has just recently been released, and how that also ties in to some of the work we've been doing. Something new today that you may not be aware of, we have a new downloadable resource that backs up this webinar today. I would encourage you to go to www.pearmangroup.com, click on the menu where it says downloads, and in that, you're going to see the webinar worksheet for today. So if this piques your interest, that's a free download. Take it, use it, share it with your team, and see if that might help just shift your thinking the next level. We are going to do an interactive poll today, so I'm going to encourage you for just a moment to get organized. Here we go. You can take a look at that QR code, or you can log in at slido.com, and there is our activity pin. If that is something you want to join us on, it's a great way to give us some input as we look at just 3 questions for today that I would love some of your insights on. So nothing will show on your poll in just a moment, but this gives you a chance to log in, and that will be available also on the coming slide. There is an idea that our thinking gets stuck, that we can't see possibilities. And there's been a number of ways that this is described over time, where maybe we get stuck, we start repeating patterns, we don't see growth opportunities, or quite frankly, we just get stubborn. So I'm going to address that as part of this recalibration exercise, noting that especially when things do feel heavy, or more chaotic, or there's just a lot of change going on, I'm going to propose to you today that our next best move may just be a small one to get us the next step and the next step. I want you to consider for a moment, have you ever had to adjust a plan or a goal because circumstances changed? Now, admittedly, I don't often ask questions that are likely going to be so popular as yes, often, and occasionally. And part of that is I want you to consider for today, while you're answering that, right? This is now part of a skill set we have to be able to adjust for. Within our leadership development programming, whether it's in person or online, I am known to use the phrase, leaders need to be clear on where they're going and flexible in how they get there. Today, leaders are going to have to make and remake organizations. Many times we have to make adjustments to a plan or a goal because the circumstances change. One of the cognitive errors that is documented in the research, so this is where our thinking gets stuck, is called escalation commitment. Escalation commitment is that when I go to make a decision as a leader, if circumstances have changed, I get stubborn and I refuse to adapt. In fact, I even dig in deeper and I go, no, I am not going to change my mind. We are sticking to the course. And that also explains maybe why some of you have been in situations within your employment or maybe even a volunteer board where someone has decided this is the direction we're going in, and they refuse to look at new evidence. Despite changes to whatever that was, they won't consider it. And that is what puts us at risk. I would make the argument that organizations are really built to be temporary and that we have to continue to reinvent them, which means leaders have to recalibrate continuously. So while this particular question was overwhelmingly yes, often, and some occasionally, we know that this is a skill set we're going to need to continue to hone. Let's try that again then. What is the biggest risk, do you think, of sticking too long to an outdated plan? Consider that for a moment. I gave you 3 options. This is where you can participate in a number of ways. Maybe you didn't lock into Slido and you want to type that into the chat. Take a moment to share that with us. What do you think that risk is? So when we stick too long and we get stubborn, right? We lock in and go, no, despite new data, I'm not staying with this. We miss opportunities for innovation. We don't pick up on a signal in our environment. We miss opportunities because we won't consider them. Now, I held a previous position where my manager loved, she didn't know it, but loved this idea of escalation commitment, to the point that she was so blocked on a particular topic that anytime it came up, the rest of us just looked at each other, and our code word was Saturday night stay, which sounds completely ridiculous, but we all knew what it meant. Once upon a time, in early days of the internet, when we were all booking our travel initially
It's
online,
a webinar.
when we were booking our travel, the argument was, well, you have to stay over Saturday night to get a cheaper airfare. Well, sometimes that was true. We kept presenting evidence that not really true. Like we could say, here's the car rental, here's the hotel, here's the food cost. And getting us home a night earlier, by the way, also doesn't wear out your team as much. And we get a little family time before you have to go back to work. Now, that seems like a simple illustration now, but what it really identified for our team was this getting stuck on a decision. And it was just one of the things that, despite new data, we could present that to our manager and she would lock in and go, not changing my mind. And we would just go, Saturday night stay. It didn't matter what the topic was, there was just no budging, which also raises this team engagement, disengagement, and burnout. Because when team members are like, seriously, we need to try this, or we see this opportunity, or we need to adjust this, or if we don't work on this, this is going to be a hot, bigger mess. That then has an impact on our people. Now, you might also think about lost time and resources, and maybe the other one's elevated to the top. But we do, when we lock in, we often miss those opportunities, which then cost us time and other resources. So that may not have been your top choice, but it remains one of them that often we see in when we stick too long to an outdated plan. We've now spent resources, which leads us to another error in the thinking cognitive process called sunk cost error. Like you've already spent it, you might as well let it go and adjust. You might have noted some other ones in the chat, and we'll come back to those in a little while. But I want you to consider for yourself today, have you ever pushed forward with a plan, even when the signs pointed toward a necessary change? I like to say in our workshops, when did your stubborn arrive? Like you locked in and said, I'm not. Now, I love good clarity, and I love good commitment and a passion around believing in what you want to believe in. And yet I want us to pay attention to when that tilts and it's no longer serving us well. So we've used this word by choice today as another opportunity to see change with insight. Recalibration is the process of assessing, adjusting, and fine-tuning actions, strategies, and mindsets to ensure alignment with desired goals and outcomes. In leadership, it also allows us to adapt intentionally rather than reactively, hoping and going to ensure or work towards that our efforts are the best ones possible, that they get us the results we want with intention and purpose. Recalibration are those small moves. In instrumentation, they're dots on a dial, they're degrees on a system. And the idea is fine-tuning so that we adjust. Just call me trim tab, small moves to get bigger change. It is essential for a number of reasons, and I just started off with a couple for your consideration today. We know that in organizations today, we don't have extra resources around. We don't have extra people and hours and budget. So we need to take best care of what we've got. Recalibration can be essential because it prevents wasted effort with alignment. You know this is working in silos, in incomplete handoffs, rework, scrap. And when we're not aligned and this department's doing what they need to do and this department's doing that they need to do and that person's just doing their own thing, it doesn't align to what problem are we trying to solve for customers? What is our purpose and how will we fulfill that in order to make sure our organization is viable for the future? I also like it because as we look at what does it actually take to layer leadership development in an organization, I want proactive leaders. I want people watching. So we teach this in strategic thinking. We teach it in critical thinking, in decision making. I want them scanning the environment to watch for signals coming. In individual development, I talk about radar screen. I want to know what pops up on your radar screen that you need to tend to and what can wait. Interesting. I was able to find some evidence in the research around recalibration can also reinforce resilience, this ability to bounce back. Because when we make it a daily practice to reflect and adapt, we are more likely going to build, I'm going to call it a little muscle memory around adjustment. And as one of my themes in these last months around confidence has shown up in a lot and for our webinars, if you want to take a look at that or ask us for the link around that boost we need to feel a little bit more certain, even when times feel uncertain. I want leaders to be confident yet humble. I need you to know that you have something to offer and you have something to learn, and to be really clear about what that is or be open enough to have it emerge. So recalibration for the purpose of this time today is not about admitting failure. It's about recognizing that staying on course sometimes means adjusting the plan. Successful leaders understand that they must continuously reflect, adjust, and move forward with intention. When we don't, we have loss, and we have some of those other items we just identified that'll pop up here again in a moment that we want to minimize. Maybe we can't get rid of them, but we're going to manage them. We're going to minimize the impact, or at least the negative impact they're having. I think it's also really important that we recognize that collaboration is really a key leadership strength. Part of my work is doing a lot around the change management process. How do we help teams get change ready? How do we navigate lots of change coming at us? And I think it's a really good spot for us to consider that as leaders, we need this set of abilities to fine tune, to be clear on where we're going and adjust how we get there, to be able to pivot without losing sight of the bigger mission. And another interesting part of this is relationship based. If you hang out with me very long, you will hear suggestions and encouragement around how do we build the relationships around us so that we can bring people with us. We got to meet them there and take them towards our goal, but we got to meet them first. This builds trust and engagement as teams see leaders be able to respond with clarity and adaptability. I dedicated one of my podcasts to this very topic and the opposite effect, wishy-washy leaders. Think about a time if you ever worked for someone who couldn't seem to make a decision. They couldn't decide what the key factors to make a good decision were. They didn't know how to find them. And sometimes they just didn't want to make them because then they were held accountable. that is a really important skill set for us to hone. And one of the things that I see within organizations today is people are like, but what if I make the wrong decision? Which I tie right back to a confidence level. You know what? How do we know? Can we vet a couple of those decisions? Can we pilot a couple of steps to be able to see, is that the right direction? And that's where I see recalibration stepping in. Now, calibration may be alignment, but recalibration is adjustment. And I want us as leaders at all levels, no matter what your job title is, right? As an influencer, you can be clear in a moment. In a meeting, you can ask a clarifying question like, just to make sure I understand where we're at, is this our next step? Or out of all the things we've discussed today, can I ask what's most important to us? That's how you, and no matter what role you hold, can support clarity and adaptability and hone your own skills while helping model it for others. So I mentioned just a moment, it's not about admitting failure, right? It's that reflect, adjust, and move. So when we take that back to a leadership strength, right? This is something we can work on. Let's consider how we might do that. Often within my work, and it's featured in my first and recent book out, is that change is not a single event. Change is the event. It's the process afterwards we have to adjust to. So really, it's a journey made up of steps from here to there. And recalibration just makes sure we're on the right pathway, that we make the moves we need to in order to read our environment and adjust our next step. There is something around staying the course, and I would believe that there's a bit of a myth around that. Leaders, to some degree, have been taught in the past to equate consistency with rigidly sticking to my original plan. Consistency is important. One of the ways I look at that is during times of change, people need to know what has not changed. So even while this may feel chaotic or out of control or overwhelming, or I've got to learn all of this and how will I adjust, there are always things that have not adjusted. Strong, effective leadership requires adaptability because the conditions in which we operate are continuously changing. The dangers of sticking to outdated goals are the ones we included earlier: lost time, team burnout, and diminished innovation. I have heard the title many times, stay the course, stay the course. And while I like consistency, I just want to make sure that the course we've chosen is, out of all the options, our best next step. So recalibration isn't about starting over. It's about refining the direction while preserving the progress. So here is our last Slido for this session today. If you have logged on since we started, I'm going to ask you to take just a moment to join us at slido.com. There's the PIN number. You can use the QR code there as well. And I want you to consider, from your own experience, if you were to read the environment or the situation you're in, what are some signs that you have experienced in the past or could consider for this moment that it's time to adjust? This is a tougher question, so I'm going to push on you a little bit, right? So stress levels go up. Think about this for a moment. We're going to give it an extra pause because I think it's really important that we start connecting the dots, or we read it on our radar screen like, ooh, that's happening. That's happening. Ooh. And so we start putting these together. Oh, I love that frustration is coming up as number one here. Yeah, so frustration often, I'll give the advice in companies, what frustrates your employees? I don't know. Well, frustration is often what we might call a low-hanging fruit. It's important, but it isn't as significant as anger. Anger, we got way bigger issues to deal with. We need to deal with those too. But frustration tends to be a lower level tension that we can now understand what is causing that and how do we need to adjust. Some of those other ones, right? Anxiety, when people start worrying, when that anxiousness is present in conversations. And certainly within many examples right now around us, there's a lot of this. uncaring. I just don't care. I get snarky or flippant. My team would tell you, that's probably one of my family would tell you. I get snarky, I get flippant. I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like literally talk to the hand. For those of you who remember that reference, right? Because often it's of an overwhelm. Like, oh, there's just so much to deal with. We miss goals. We are more tired or more exhausted, which should be our moment to recalibrate, to recognize what's showing up and say, whoa, where are we at? And if we've hit a shutdown, it is our next best step to go, where are we at? What do we need to do next? So I would offer that maybe this just reinforces some key ideas you've already practiced, you're already familiar with. It's been interesting as I was working on the material in preparation for our time together. It's really looking at what is it amongst the change process and leading with intention and having a good strategy and pulling people together and building relationships, all the things we talked about in our sessions or I've written about in 49 Chameleons, our book. But this risk of just reading the environment and as a leader, knowing when to step in. When people are not clear on the direction of the strategy, they naturally decide for themselves where they invest their time, resources, and effort. And I always look at this as when we don't tell people where we're going, they make it up. So being adaptable is not a weakness, it's actually a leadership strength. Maybe today that's your consideration. Maybe your recalibration point is to bring people together right now and go, okay, where are we at? What's our next step? Where are we going? Because maybe recently that has shifted. Recalibration, though, is a process. It's not just, I do this, we're good, right? It's reflection, adjustment, re-engagement. And it's a process, meaning multiple steps. So this is not a one and done approach. Fine-tuning. Small moves, Ellie, right? What's our next step? I heard something here. I flip over here. I hear something there. What do I pay attention to? So briefly, for the purpose of today, just want to give you 3 simple steps to take on a really complicated world. So at the risk of oversimplifying this, sometimes we just need something we can work on. Thus, what can we recalibrate? There is a pause here. Assess where you are and where you intended to be. I have made the argument for a long time that leaders need think time. You need on the business time, you need in the business time, but we all do, I think, as humans and professionals, that pause. Maybe it's a pause before you walk into that meeting. Maybe it's a pause before you log on for that Zoom call. Maybe it's a pause before you work on that project. But this is your continuous improvement process to say what's working and what's not. We know that during times of change, we need to also pause and reflect on what has not changed. I don't want to change things just for the sake of stirring it up. I want to make sure that I'm intentional and I know what my next best move is. We need to adjust then. And while this sounds pretty darn direct, right, that pause, what is your next best move? Because not everything you do is of equal value. And you could mess with this and you could mess with that. You could mess with this. There are lots of things you could pay attention to. Which lever are you going to move? So it might be reading your external environment and saying, this is what we need to do right now to adapt based on what we know. It might be reading your internal environment. You're watching frustrations and stress and disengagement, some of the things you just named. It's being intentional about how we respond. My favorite word for a long time in this work has been strategy, a declaration.
Well, my speaker's not working. Oh, actually, I need to call.
So guiding purposeful action in that specific direction. Small moves. What's our next best step? Often when we tie this to communication, and in my work day to day with organizations, people say, you know what, if everybody would just communicate around here, this would go way better. I think it's so important that we recognize as leaders, we may have made this adjustment. A lot of times I'll remind leaders, like, you got to let people into your head a little bit here, folks. You know it up here. Have you said it out here? Have you opened it up for discussion? Have you explained the why behind it or this move versus that move? My husband has noted in 32 years of marriage, I can leapfrog really well. So we might have be having a conversation about A. My brain just went through B, C, D, E, and all of a sudden I bring up G to him. Who knows what happened to F, right? And so we need to really pay attention that when we make these recalibrations, we might have meant one thing, but did something else, and we got to loop people in. What has or has not changed? And I believe within organizational systems, we're trying to figure out how to share multiple ways, multiple times, because people will hear this differently based on where they are in the process. So many times within my work around change management, I'll have a senior team tell me, we're good, we're making some progress, look at us go. But then I talk to frontline and they go, I don't know, is anything different? So senior leaders go, we've adjusted, we're moving forward, we've made some great steps. We just got to make sure the time and the communication have been out there so people can recommit to move that along. At the risk of oversimplifying this, I think one of the things that maybe we all could use a little more of today is, what's my next best step? How do I need to adjust for what I'm reading in my environment to be able to make the move and use my energy and resources in the best way? Successful leaders embed real-time course correction into their leadership style. There are many examples out there in our world, and I could add athletics into that with coaching in real time and live time adjustments. Maybe today, that's your next move. Maybe it's making a course correction because what made sense even a week ago or 2 months ago or a year ago just doesn't make sense anymore. And what I love to ask is, what have you gotten stubborn on? Like, what have you just locked in on? Not changing that. Maybe it's time to reflect on that. Leaders who also recalibrate foster resilience, accountability, and long-term success. People learn how to bounce back faster because the smaller the moves, the more muscle memory we get to create. And when those expectations are clear, we can hold people accountable. And ultimately, this is about moves for long-term success. Sometimes you come across resources on the internet that describe the point from here to there as this long, windy, hot kind of mess. Sometimes they're mapped out as crazy line drawings that have all this stuff in them. And what we know is it is the journey between here and there, where we build relationships, we adjust for what's going on, we do the work to get us to that next goal. Culturally, we have described this for a long time as 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, but hopefully not 14 steps backwards. Small moves increase our adaptability. It reinforces our purpose. It can prevent burnout, as noted earlier. And I love the fact that it can model leadership transparency, showing that thoughtful adjustments are a strength, not a weakness. And with some intention behind that, even if we don't know what the entire playbook looks like, we know this play is our next best option. Flexibility in thought and action allows, by the way, this continuous growth and adaptation in an ever-evolving environment. What I do love about the point of adjustments create momentum. Even a moment ago, I mentioned the cultural phrase that you can see across many, many different histories and cultural beliefs of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, not 14 steps back. I have long proposed that sometimes a step back is what we need to be able to move forward. I'm not often popular when I tell business leaders, sometimes you got to slow down to go fast. Same kind of concept. But also the idea is maybe you just had a week where there was a major miss. Maybe we messed up for a client. We didn't fulfill a commitment that we had planned to. That is a step back. I want us as leaders to pay attention to the step back, because I also believe that is a recalibration going forward. I just want us to catch it at one step back or two steps back before we get back to 14 behind. So for today, recalibration in action is to name a goal. What is next? What's working and what's not? Assess where you are, where you intended to be, and does the pathway look the same, or do you need to adjust it? Is it the pathway that needs to change, or is it the goal itself? With that new information, realign and adjust your efforts. And then communicate that. Who needs to know? How much do they need to know? And recommit that there are also some things that have not changed in the process, and those can be guideposts. They can nudge us along the way when we need them the most. A couple of last prompts that you may consider for today. And if you decide, if you joined us a little later, or you forgot about this already, on www.pearmangroup.com, there is a downloads button, and the worksheet from today's webinar is available to you there. And there's a variety of reflection prompts just to get you thinking about how could you apply this? What would be your next move? And you can also tell us some feedback on, did you like the worksheet and should we keep doing those? But consider a project or a goal. What has changed since you began it? So big changes with an organization. We're rolling out this new computer system. And when we made the decision, we made it based on the best data we had. But now we're at implementation and rollout, and it looks different because conditions around us have changed. It could be big, costly decisions, or it might be something you decided on recently that needs to be revisited. What has changed? What adjustments might you make to improve alignment and outcomes? How could recalibration create momentum rather than setbacks? And what challenges can you anticipate when recalibrating? Because even during the period of adjustment, small moves on the dial, there might be something unexpected that comes up. And you may not know what they are, yet I'm pretty sure you can be confident that you can figure it out. Small shifts today lead to big impact. Recalibration is not just a one-time fix. I would like to present the argument today that this is one of our best ongoing leadership habits going forward. Start those pause and reflect. Encourage some team feedback to gain insights about progress and challenges. And I will always recalibrate and triangulate that I can make the observation, I can get feedback, and I'm going to try and tie it to some data or key metrics so that we make informed adjustments that provide us less bias in order to calibrate that with other points. I also think as we come to some conclusion on this, that it's really important to normalize. Of course, we're going to make some adjustments. And when we make that a structured habit and teach it to others, it becomes part of what we do. If we can talk about it with our teams, it shouldn't slow us down. It should help us stay true to our purpose while moving forward with that clarity and confidence I mentioned. What's next? Maybe today it was something I said. Maybe it was something you thought about because you dedicated this time with us here today. What is one goal or project you could give consideration to recalibrate this week? Again, you've got the download available to you. We'll leave that up. Remember, this doesn't slow you down. It really does help you stay true. I mentioned a moment ago to move forward with clarity and confidence. If there's something else we can do for you, please reach out to myself and any of our team as we help organizations layer in leadership learning multiple ways in different styles so that people can learn and organizations can improve. I'm going to bring this back here and I'm going to end that recording.